Good evening. The show is The Smoking Section with Stephen Helfer, and welcome every Wednesday, 7 p.m. Today on Cambridge Citizens for Smokers' Rights Facebook page, we posted an article from, I guess it's called the Brookline tab, and quite understandably, of course, Brookline, which has always been a town which has been anti-tobacco, and I would say a town that just loves restrictions on people and doesn't seem to think that people can make their own decisions, particularly regarding tobacco. Before the May town meeting, two doctors who are married and who live in Brookline are proposing a law that would ban the sale of tobacco to anyone born after 1995. So right now, to buy tobacco in Brookline, you must be 21, but what that would do would be basically put in an entire and total prohibition on the sale of tobacco in Brookline, but it would kick in only for people who at this point are under 21. So meaning that 10 years from now, if you were 21, you wouldn't be able to buy tobacco in Brookline because you would have been born after 1995. So it's kind of a backdoor way of putting in a total prohibition. And these two doctors are proposing it, but I don't think it was their idea. I really think it was an organization called the Public Health Advocacy Institute at Northeastern University, which used to be the Tobacco Litigation Project, which was started by a man named Richard Daynard, who made about many millions of dollars in the tobacco lawsuit, the state tobacco lawsuits, of course, which are paid for by smokers. So I think they put these two doctors up who happen to live in Brookline to put this before the town meeting. And this article, one of the doctors is a man named John Ross, who is from Brigham and Women's Hospital, and his wife Megan Sandell. And she is, of course, the medical director for the Center for Medical Legal Partnership. Now, if that isn't scary, I don't know what is. I mean, when the doctors and the lawyers get together and start promoting different legislation and ordinances and whatnot, I think any American who values any kind of liberty or any kind of freedom should be very careful, because these are both groups of people that like power, like to wield power, and don't have a lot of respect for the average man or woman and for the average man or woman's ideas on how they want to live their life. So it's no surprise that she would be someone who would want to put and institute what it actually, again, is a total prohibition on tobacco. Now, supposedly this is to cut down the teenage smoking rate, but again, this is something very important to note, that the teenage smoking rate nationwide is lower than it's been in 40 years. So this idea that we have to protect the teenagers from the predations of the tobacco companies is an obvious ploy to implement total prohibition and to wage war on people who smoke and those businesses who support us. I mean, more teenagers smoke marijuana by federal statistics, this is said, smoke marijuana than smoke tobacco. And there is, as yet, in Massachusetts, no legal way for them to buy this, yet somehow we're going to cut down teenage smoking rate, which is already at an extreme low, by banning the sale of tobacco. Now, of course, again, this is, I think, these two persons have been put up to this by the Public Health Advocacy Institute in Northeastern University, and there's a fellow named Mark Gottlieb, who seems to be their tobacco point man, who wrote an op-ed several years ago in the Cambridge Chronicle. He is a Cambridge resident, and he was one of the people who was really behind banning smoking in Cambridge parks. He felt that somehow, even for young people to see us smoking is somehow very, very, they will be led astray by us. And he is saying to the town of Brookline that if there is any legal action brought against them, if they pass this ordinance, that the Public Health Advocacy Institute will help them. Of course, I don't know where they get their funds from, but some do-gooder organization, I am sure, which again wants to take away the rights of Americans to have control over their own lives, particularly in regards to tobacco. But of course, they're using tobacco and doing everything they can to promote all kinds of restrictions regarding what people can eat, and fines against people, for example, vis-a-vis their medical care or their medical insurance if they don't exercise enough and the like. And so this man, John Ross, this doctor, says that tobacco is a drug. Well, there really is no good scientific definition of drug. I think the FDA defines drug as anything that can affect the human body, but of course, by that definition, water is a drug, or chamomile tea is a drug. Coca-Cola is a drug because it contains a certain amount of caffeine, so it stimulates you a bit. And the best definition that I saw of a drug is anything which, administered to a rat, produces 2 scientific papers. So basically, you can call anything that a person ingests in any regard as a drug. But he doesn't stop there. Of course, he goes on to say that 480,000 people die each year from tobacco. But this statistic, which is bandied about all the time by anti-smokers, is really a production. There are not really 480,000 people dying from tobacco. This is just a computer-driven model. And depending what you put into it, what data you put in, whether it's accurate or inaccurate, or whether there's strong evidence or weak evidence for it, it will come up, spit out a number, and this number will be something you can use to propagandize. But a few years ago, 2 statisticians looked at this number, and they did a certain analysis of it, and they found that even according to the Centers for Disease and Control, which puts out this number, the average age of when these people are supposedly dying from tobacco is in 70s or 80s. It's not young people dying, it's old people dying, and that's what old people do. They die regardless of whether they smoke or not. So if someone dies of a heart attack at the age of 80 and he's a smoker, we can say, oh, that's a smoking-related death. But of course, there are many other people who have never smoked a cigarette in their lives, dying from heart attacks or from getting cancer, etc. And they don't smoke. So how it is that they can say that this disease is caused from smoking, they never say. They simply say that if you smoke and you get sick, then it's got to be from smoking. And So that 480,000 figure is a real lie by statistics. And of course, he mentions that. And it's also important to realize that when they talk about smoking-related diseases, these are exactly the same diseases that non-smokers get. 90% of non-smokers die from what are called smoking-related diseases, and these are basically cancer, heart disease, and stroke. Everyone who dies, just about, unless you die in an accident or in a homicide or a suicide, is going to die from one of these diseases. Now, so there's no way they can say with any kind of degree of scientific certainty that someone who dies from these diseases who smoked it's caused by smoking, because there are so many people who die from them who never smoked in their lives. And then John Ross goes on. This is Dr. John Ross in Brookline, who is proposing this for a May meeting in the Brookline town meeting, which is not something that members of the public can speak in unless they are town residents of Brookline. And even then, because Brookline is such a large town, they're only, you have to be kind of like a I don't know what they call them, but they are selected people to speak, people who have volunteered and who have, I guess, won an election process. So it's not a really, really open town meeting. I remember I attended the meeting in, I think it was 1994, 22 years ago. Was that 22 years ago? Yes, when Brookline was the first town to ban smoking in its bars and restaurants. And it was a very interesting meeting. A lot of very good oratory in the meeting on both sides of the issue, mostly I would say on my side of the issue. But again, we're getting to a society which does not believe in freedom. And the whole American experiment was the idea that the common man and common woman not only should be free, but had an unalienable right to be free. And slowly we're seeing these restrictions put on us, especially in regards to tobacco, which of course, there is nothing more American to tobacco. I mean, tobacco, as I've noted on this program so many times, comes from the New World, spread throughout the world way before there was a tobacco industry, way before there was any kind of advertising, and was revered by Native Americans in both South America and North America. So this repudiation of tobacco, in some ways, is a repudiation of America and of our Constitution. And this fellow John Ross says, well, he considers tobacco to be a drug on the level of an opiate. Now, if that isn't preposterous, I don't know what is. I mean, each year we're having about 1,500 deaths from opiate addiction, from opiate overdoses. Yet, as I've lived in Massachusetts for 40 years, I have never heard of someone dying from a tobacco overdose, or even a nicotine overdose from the nicotine liquid that's used for electronic cigarettes. Never have I heard about that. And believe me, if someone had, we would have heard about that. And if it's on the level of an opiate, I wonder, why is it then that people who drive cars or drive planes or operate dangerous machinery can do so without any danger in smoke? And I've never heard of someone who was too tired to go to work the following day because he had smoked too many cigarettes the night before. So simply because this person is a medical doctor, I don't think we should give him, when he says something that is absurd, like tobacco is on the level of an opiate, he should be challenged. And I wish he would be challenged. And that's what Cambridge Citizens for Smokers' Rights comes in, to get people to use their reason, their common sense, and their own experience. So for example, he talks about it as an addictive drug. but people, when they get addicted to opiates, they have to go to a hospital and they have to have treatment, and they take methadone and they take Suboxone, whereas millions upon millions upon millions of Americans have given up smoking and tobacco, and the only withdrawal symptoms that they experience are a few days of irritability, perhaps a craving for sweets, and a somewhat diminished ability to concentrate for a period of a few days. Nothing like opiate addiction. And of course, he brings up the statistic that supposedly tobacco causes the state of Massachusetts in medical treatment $408 billion a year. Now, in 1998, when the 46 state attorneys general sued the tobacco companies, Scott Harshbarger, who was the Attorney General of Massachusetts at that time, thundered that tobacco costs the state $200 million a year in medical costs. Almost 20 years later, when the number of people in Massachusetts has dropped considerably who smoke, now we're being told the number's not 200 million, it is now 4.08 billion. So these people simply make up these numbers, and unfortunately, very few people in the media and very few citizens really want to challenge them. And of course, they don't mention the fact that the state relies heavily on its tobacco taxes, which amount to a revenue for the state of Massachusetts of $1 billion a year, which I think is the fifth largest source of revenue for the state, according to what I have read. I assume, let's say, the income tax may be the highest and the sales tax may be higher, but certainly Massachusetts has come to depend very greatly on its smokers. That I think about less than 1 million, because the state of Massachusetts has about 6 million people, and certainly I think about 850,000 or 700,000 of us are subjected to these predatory taxes. And again, the state makes close to $1 billion. So I'm hoping at this May meeting that in Brookline, those people who value liberty and value the idea, the American experiment, that the common man and woman can decide for themselves, will not pass this ordinance, because certainly the Public Health Advocacy Institute at Northeastern, I think, is behind this. They are behind the scenes, and they simply were looking for two people who were residents of Brookline to propose this. And I think the Public Health Advocacy Institute probably were behind the attempt in Westminster to ban the sale of tobacco in the town, which of course turned out to be a fiasco for them. But part of it, I think, is Westminster is not as affluent or as liberal as Brookline. So I am cautiously optimistic that this will not pass, but of course, Brookline is a very different town than Westminster, Massachusetts, which is about an hour and a half west, and where the people are less inclined to be in favor of government interventions. Now, again, the man's wife, Megan Sandler, or Sandell, is part of is the medical director for the Center for Medical Legal Partnership. And So he says, John Ross, that they are not very political people, but certainly his wife must be a very political person and has been looking for something like this to go. But I think it would be a very interesting meeting to attend, and it will be in May sometime, and I hope that Cambridge Citizens for Smokers' Rights goes there, if for no other reason than to just see what happens and perhaps support those people who will speak against this, because I have no doubt there will be people. They're not just people in the convenience store business, which according to the convenience store trade group, almost a third of their revenue comes from tobacco sales, and many convenience stores are owned by recent immigrants, and many convenience stores in this state, they employ many people. So an attack on them is not just an attack on their business and on what they sell, but it's an attack on their freedom, what they can sell, what they can't sell. And of course, these two doctors don't mention that that ever since tobacco has been so warred upon, the number of adult Americans who are taking antidepressants and psychoactive medications has, of course, gotten to be about 1 in 5 adult Americans. And, this is no doubt, I think, connected to, not entirely caused by, but connected to the fact that people can no longer relax with a cigarette and with a beer, or relax with a cigarette at home and watch television, because their family members have been so propagandized that they won't let them smoke in their own homes. Now, I just spoke to James Williamson, who's a local activist, and he was very helpful to us, not only in fighting the Park smoking ban, but fighting the Cambridge Housing Authority smoking ban. And he wanted me to say that there will be a book talk at the Harvard Bookstore Friday, April 22, and it will be by a man named Thomas Grace, who was actually one of the students injured at Kent State. So you might want to see it at the Harvard Bookstore. Thanks for watching the smoking section.